And throughout the gospel we find that Jesus' followers are told several times, they don't understand. You don't understand. It's even reported that they didn't understand. So it's no surprise, really, that the message is so difficult to comprehend when even those that were with Jesus did not comprehend it and believe it themselves, if we are to believe the narratives that are presented in the New Testament. We also need to accept that it implies a limited God, a God that cannot hold the attributes of eternalness, being all-powerful, and also a unified God. Why? When we say that God is one in opposition to the Trinity, we don't mean one in terms of a numerical one, that 0 can come before it and 2 can come after it. We mean in an absolute unity that is not describable in mathematical terms. Now, when we consider the Trinity, that actually applies a created aspect to God. You're saying 3. The number 3 in that 2 comes before it and 4 comes after it. There's no way around this. It's not a complex number. For those of you that are doing mathematics or science, you'll know it's even within the real number system, 3. So you're applying a created aspect to God, and there can absolutely be no such divine unity in that concept. Even if somebody came to you and said God is one in the sense of the number 1, that 0 can come before it and 2 can come after it, that in itself is not even a proper unity, in terms of a godly unity. Okay, it's very important to understand that point. All-powerful. Well, if I can just ask the Christians here in the room to give me a quick show of hands, who thinks through the sacrifice of Jesus you're guaranteed entry into heaven? Okay. So are you going to stand before God on the day of judgment and say, you now need to let me into heaven because I've believed in something? So God's going to be forced to let you into heaven? So you have a God that's not all-powerful because you as a human being are now forcing him to do something. And your God certainly can't be eternal, because if he gave up his attributes to become Jesus, or if the Son gave up his godly attributes to become fully man, then he's changed. And an eternal being, by definition, cannot change, because any change will be subject to a specific point in time. And you'll have before the being had this change, and then after the being had this change. So your God can't be eternal, he can't be all-powerful, and he can't be unified. And at the same time, the message is not even understood by the key people that were with your God when he was here on earth.
He said that the Christian view of Jesus paying for your sins and guaranteeing your salvation limits God. Now, I don't believe it does this at all, because it's what God has done for us, and he gives it to us as a free gift. Just because I take that gift from God and say, thank you, I'll receive this gift of salvation, that's not compelling God to do anything. He's given it to me as a gift. It's like if I give a gift to my child, and the child takes it and says, thank you, I'll have this gift. The child's not compelling me. That's just, I'm not sure how you can get to that. It's not a compulsion, it's just thankfulness, receiving what God has given. He said that if God has taken on flesh, then God has changed and he's not eternal. I'm not exactly sure that eternal means unchanging. I'm not sure if that's Greek classical concepts of God, but I actually think that Allah has changed. Because before creation, Allah is the singularity. Who does he love? Who does he relate to? No one. He has the potential to relate, but he never actually relates to anyone because it's just him. After creation, he can now relate to people as he does, according to the Qur'an. So there's a change. Before creation, never relates to anyone. After creation, now relating. This is actually where the doctrine of the Trinity upholds God's eternal nature, because before creation, God was relating within himself and was truly self-sufficient and didn't need creation to begin to express his personal attributes.
That it causes God to be limited in the ways that I mentioned, becoming non-eternal. By definition, this is just a fact, it's not Greek philosophy. Anything that's eternal cannot change. And we can perhaps go through that in the question and answers. It means that God cannot be unified. Now Samuel said, well, in order for God to be relational, he must have had someone to relate to. This is imposing a human understanding upon God. God is absolutely self-sufficient. He does not need what we need in order to be merciful, in order to be relational, in order to be loving. He was the creator before he created. He didn't need to create something to be the creator. It's as simple as that. This is what we believe in, the one God, the eternal God, the self-sufficient God who's given us a guideline for this life to work towards the next life. Thank you very much.
My question's to Abdullah. You talked a lot about logic, and one of the last statements you made that sort of caught my attention was that you don't need to create something to be a creator. Now, isn't that just logically illogical? How can you be termed a creator if you don't create something?
That's an excellent question. How can someone... Okay, I didn't say that you can be called a creator and not create something. God, we're talking about God. Now remember, come back to my initial point in terms of if God is eternal, he cannot have undergone any change. Likewise, if God is the necessary existent, okay, he is self-sufficient. We rely totally on him. Everything that exists relies totally upon him. Then he does not need to do something to manifest an attribute that he has. Okay, now you're asking, well, hang on, that doesn't quite make sense. Let me go a step further. And if I lose you in the details, I apologise, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's a complex theological issue. The issue basically herein is that we break up, and this is Islamic theology, by the way, we break up all things relating to God into three categories: the possible, the necessary, and the impossible. Okay, now probably the first thing that's thinking in your head, hang on, impossible for God. I'll talk about what I mean. Impossible for God, for example, would be for him to change one of his necessary attributes such that he would no longer be considered to be God. So, for example, we consider God to exist eternally. Can he become non-existing? Would you say that God can become non-existing? Absolutely not. So this is one example of the things that is impossible for God. In terms of the possible, it's for him to create, to uncreate, or to take out of existence, and to fashion as he wills. Now, he has this power whether or not he exercises it. Whether or not he exercises it. So regardless of whether he creates something or not, it's only possible for him to create, to uncreate, and to render as he wills. So whether he has actually created or not, he is still the creator. Does that kind of make sense? I'm very sorry if I've lost people in that, but it's not a sort of a 5-second answer. Sorry.
G'day. This is a question for Abdullah, and I'm sorry it's a little bit long-winded, but when you said that there's a logical fallacy in the idea that when we go to heaven as Christians, that we can demand God to allow us into heaven, which means that God's not all-powerful. My question is, and it involves a few smaller questions, but am I right in thinking that Allah is a wholly good being, as in incapable of sin? Am I right in that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which means that Allah obviously can't lie.
That's right. I know where you're heading. If I can just preempt it, because I think I might save you a little bit of your long-windedness. We believe that God has made a promise to the believers, and he's made a threat to the non-believers. And we expect, based on our human expectations, that a wholly good being, which we certainly know that God is, would not break that promise. However, we do expect that in his mercy, he may choose to relieve the threat. Okay, so promise to the good people, threat to the bad people. That's the first point. Second point is, however, and this is very important, even though I expect that based on my limited human understanding. And many of our theologians, in fact, one of the best ones, Imam al-Ghazali, put it best when he said that if on the day of judgment God passes the evil people into heaven and the good people into hell, then we would not have a right to question, because this is the way of God, and he is above all of our comprehension. And in fact, if we turn to the book of Isaiah, we see exactly this sort of explanation being given, where God says, my ways are not your ways, my ways are different to you. You don't understand me necessarily. So having said that, the short answer to your question is, I do accept that God's promise will be fulfilled, but I will have no right to A, demand it, and B, I'll have no right to contest it if that's not the case. Does that save you some...
Well, in the case of, I guess, Christian belief, we're of the same position, that if we were to get to heaven and he was to say no, then that would we can't possibly understand the mind of God. And so whatever his will is perfect. But like in your own argument, you said that one of the great things about the Qur'an is how clear it is. And so if God has made a promise that the good will be rewarded, then it's exactly the same for us Christians, in that we have been promised that through Jesus Christ that we will be saved. And so regardless of whether you believe it or not, you have to admit that there's not actually a logical fallacy, in that it's a matter of God has given us a promise, which is in itself a miracle, that he would give such a lower being as humans, same with the Qur'an, that he has given he has promised us something that we have no right to ask for and have no right to actually receive, but he has still promised it, and therefore God, being a perfect being, by his very nature will fulfill that promise. Whether or not it happens in the exact way that we imagine it isn't for us to decide, but it's not a logical fallacy that God will actually fulfill his promises to us.
I agree with everything except for just one point in that sort of part. First of all, you're saying that it's our belief that God will fulfill his promise, but we don't necessarily have a rock-solid guarantee. It is not like the Christian equivalent. And I'll tell you why it's unlike the Christian equivalent. In Islam, we are working through our own deeds to present to God. In Christianity, you have a sacrifice that's been done for you by God. Now, God is a perfect being. Everything that he does is perfect. It cannot be questioned. So by doing this action whereby he has done a sacrifice, which then will admit all of those that accept it into heaven, he has done something which he later cannot take back. He cannot question. He's overridden his own power. So unfortunately, it's totally not the same, and that's the reason why it's not the same. And this is my point. If we want to make the logical fallacy simple, it's either you accept that the sacrifice isn't 100% guaranteed, and therefore that God is not powerful enough to do a full and complete sacrifice, or you accept that the sacrifice is 100% guaranteed, but he will then not have the power to stop you from entering heaven. You can only accept one of the two, and either one results in a God that is not all-powerful. Hopefully that makes sense.